School Leader. We're going to be talking about bitterness this week. Now, what are some bitter foods that you can think of? I think of cocoa powder, coffee beans, chicory, cranberries. Okay, those bitter foods, when you put them in your mouth, they make your mouth feel dry. You're drawn up and it's unpleasant, and that's exactly the reaction when one harbors bitter feelings. Their disposition, their personality, the way they come across is unpleasant. In fact, you probably know some people who have harbored bitterness for decades, and they're just old, bitter people. You can just tell by looking at them that they're old, bitter people. Well, there is a Hebrew word for bitter. It's the word mara. In Exodus chapter 15, verses 22 through 23, it says this: Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Mara, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That's why the place is called Mara. So another story you might be familiar with is out of Ruth chapter 1, verses 19 through 21. And it says this: So the two women, that would be Naomi and Ruth, went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, Can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Yes, she was pretty bitter, wasn't she? Call her Mara. Well, we are looking at the 5th lesson in this unit on how to avoid life's pitfalls. And this week we're looking at the pitfall of bitterness. And the point of this lesson is relationships can only move forward with forgiveness. Well, our natural response to bitterness is repulsion. That's true with food. Let's take coffee, for instance. Most people have to acquire a taste for coffee. Now, I can remember way back as a wee little child tasting Daddy's black coffee, and yuck, it was awful. It was too bitter. It was too strong. When I got a little older, maybe into high school, maybe early college, I went with half weak coffee, half cream, half sugar, okay, and gradually decreased those additives and increased the strength of the coffee. Now, I like my coffee black, and I like it strong. And I didn't start off like that. I eased into it. And I believe it's the same way with spiritual or emotional bitterness. If people could see how much bitterness they would tolerate in 40 or 50 years later, just like I was able to tolerate so much more coffee bitterness, I think they'd let go of that hurt earlier. Okay? Now, let's admit it. Forgiving another person can be very difficult. Really difficult. But not forgiving leads to that bitter spirit. Let me tell you about somebody who forgave somebody that you may not be familiar with. During a routine sweep of Central Park in 1986, New York City police officer Stephen McDonald was shot in the back of the head 3 times by a 15-year-old kid. And because of that momentary act of violence, Stephen spent 31 years confined to a wheelchair as a quadriplegic. So before passing away, he hadn't been able to hold his wife in over 3 decades. He never got to hold or play catch with his son. His son was just born a few months after the shooting. But Stephen forgave the young man who shot him. He said these words: I forgave him because I believe the only thing worse than receiving a bullet in my spine would have been to nurture revenge in my heart. Such an attitude would have extended my injury to my soul, hurting my wife, son, and others even more. I've come to realize that anger is a wasted emotion. Wow, that's pretty powerful, isn't it? Well, in our study of Joseph's life, we've seen a man who had every reason to feel hurt and angry and bitter, but he chose forgiveness instead. So let's get back up to speed on the story of Joseph. So Joseph had a lot of scars, and they weren't physical necessarily, but emotional, psychological. And here's the thing about a scar. Every time you look at the scar, you remember the incident, don't you? Let me tell you a story. Back again, several years ago, back in the late 70s when I was a junior and senior in high school. We had this bottle of sulfuric acid that we would use to unclog the drains, especially in the kitchen. And as a careless teenager, one time, and I usually was pretty careful, but this time I wasn't. I unscrewed the bottle and poured it, and it splashed a little bit. And it splashed up on my jeans that I was wearing, and immediately it burnt little holes where those drops fell on my jeans. And underneath the jeans was my leg. And my leg for decades had this scar where hair would not grow. Finally, it's gotten to where you don't see it as much, but if you look carefully, you can see it. Well, every time I looked at that scar, I was taken back to that day 40-some years ago. And unless my memory starts to fail me even worse than it has now, I will not forget that hurt. Here's the thing, I didn't have to nurse the hurt. I could remember it, but not nurse it. And that's an important part of forgiveness. But here's the thing about Joseph's scars. They were mainly emotional scars. You know, his brother sold him into slavery. He was falsely accused by his brother's wife, or by his boss's wife, of sexual misconduct. He was forgotten in prison by a man he had helped. 13 years of this up and down cycle. Well, last week we saw that Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream. The dream was you were going to have 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, so you better prepare. And so Pharaoh appointed Joseph to be in charge of everything, to be in charge of this program, to be prepared for the famine. So the years of plenty came and produced bumper crops, but then the famine hit, and it struck hard. It struck hard in Joseph's homeland, his homeland of Canaan, where his father and his brothers lived, which meant they were forced to join the many nations that were coming to Egypt for grain. They were basically the refugees of their day. Now, so the brothers go to Egypt, they try to find some food, and they appear before Joseph, but they don't recognize him. Of course, he's all cleaned up. He's 13 years older. He's 30 now. He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. Probably all pretty and dressed up in Egyptian garb. And he does not reveal himself immediately to them. In Genesis chapter 42 through 44, it tells about a series of tests that Joseph put his brothers through when they arrived in Egypt. Tests that were designed to reveal any changes in their character. So as we look at the first part of the text in our lesson this week in Genesis chapter 45, verses 1 through 5, we're going to see here in a little bit that we're about 2 years into the 7-year famine at this point in the story. And in the passage, when he talks to his brothers and declares, "I am Joseph," yeah, that must have been a powerful moment for him, a very overwhelming moment. But what happened after that could have certainly gone very differently. Joseph could have followed his introduction by saying, "I am Joseph, your brother, and how do you like my coat now?" Right? I had the coat of many colors that you took off of me, but I've got this fancy Egyptian coat. You guys ever been in a pit? Well, let me introduce you to one, okay? And such statements may have been justified in a way based on the way his brothers had treated him years earlier. Joseph now has the chance to get back at his brothers for the horrible scars that they have given him. And, you know, really, we might not blame him for seeing himself as a victim. And we wouldn't blame him, really, if he wanted some kind of payback. But Joseph refused to be the victim. He refused to use his physical and emotional scars as reasons for revenge. Instead, Joseph sees his scars as signs of God's working in his life. And so after he revealed his identity, Joseph asked about his father if he was still alive. "Is my father still living?" What a moment for Joseph's brothers. Here in an instant, the weight of their guilt and lies over the years, it was exchanged for this heart-stopping realization that the next few moments might be their last. Joseph could have ended their lives simply with a wave of his hand, but instead, Joseph invited them to come closer, and the brothers received an invitation to be restored in their relationship. They were given a second chance. The burden of their lies to be removed. The relationship was repaired and forgiveness was extended. And Joseph saw that in his brothers, and that they were worried, that they were probably scared when he said, come closer. And he said, don't be worried or angry with yourselves. See, Joseph gave his brothers permission to stand tall in forgiveness. He said it was God and not his brothers who had sent him there to Egypt. God brought a caravan just at the right time to buy him into slavery. God introduced Joseph to the baker and the cupbearer. God sent the dreams to Pharaoh and gave Joseph the ability and the opportunity to interpret these dreams and offer a plan of action. God was at work the whole time in all of this. Well, in our lives, even in the difficult and trying circumstances, just try to remember that God may be using those difficult situations and difficult people. That's the tough one, the difficult people, to bring you into a better place and a closer walk with him later on down the road. Don't hold those circumstances against those other people who are involved. Allow God to work through your heartfelt, honest words that could speak freedom and forgiveness. You've heard it said, forgive and forget. Well, unless you get some case of holy amnesia, I believe that it's impossible to forget. So a question you might ask the class is, how do we let go of the past and forgive when we can't really forget? Well, in Genesis, the next few verses, Genesis 45, verses 6 through 8, Joseph reiterated that this was all in God's plan, not just to save him, but the whole family as well. Our last set of verses is chapter 45, verses 9 through 11. Now, my wife and I, we watch a lot of HGTV at our house, a lot of home remodeling, restoration shows where they take this old, dilapidated house, overgrown with weeds, maybe settled in by squatters, and there's junk and trash and even animal droppings all over the place. They come in and they clean it up and they restore the house to its original beauty, maybe even better. A restored home is nice, but a restored relationship is truly amazing. When Joseph covered the relationship with his brothers in forgiveness, all of their lives gained a new color and a new texture. They started walking on a new foundation in the relationship that was no longer cracked, no longer broken, no longer worn out from betrayal and lies. They walked on forgiveness and hope instead. It was a new day in their relationship. And Joseph knew one man was still filled with mourning and sorrow. It'd be his father Jacob. Joseph directed his brothers to leave immediately and tell their father the news. They were to tell the truth this time. You see, Father Jacob's 13-year time of grief would finally turn to joy. He would surely remember the dreams that Joseph had spoken of as a teenager that would finally come to pass about the wheat bowing down and the moon and sun bowing down to him. Joseph desired his family to be close once again. And just like in verse 4, when he asked his brothers to come closer, in verse 10, he emphasized his desire for his family to be close again. Settle in the land of Goshen and be near me. The emotional and psychological distance that once separated them, that was being closed. And so now the physical distance between them would grow closer as well. The space between them was removed by forgiveness. Now remember, the point of this lesson is relationships can only move forward through forgiveness. The opposite of forgiveness is harboring that bitterness. What else does the Bible say about bitterness? You might look at Ephesians 4:31 that says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Hebrews 12:15 says, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root, that's bitterness, no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. The cure for bitterness is forgiveness. Now, forgiveness isn't always easy. And here's something that I said a few weeks ago in another Sunday school lesson. But living the Christian life isn't always about taking the easy road. Sometimes it involves doing the difficult but the right thing. Now, here are some sayings. Bitterness is how we punish ourselves for other people's sins. Bitter experiences do not have to produce bitter people. Bitterness and resentment only hurt one person, and it's not the one person we're resenting, it's us. Bitterness is cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. Don't allow the constant thoughtlessness deeds of some leave a bitter taste in your mouth. Wash it down with sweetened forgiveness and move on. All right, next week we're going to finish up this series and look at the pitfall of guilt and grudges. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget, pray for and with your class this week.